Today, we are having a hearing on the Biden administration's fiscal year 2023 budget request for the Department of Labor. Senator Blunt and I will each have an opening statement, then I will introduce our witness, and after his testimony, senators will each have 5 minutes for a round of questions. We are unable to have this hearing fully open to the public yet or for media and for in-person attendance, but live video is available on our committee website. If you are in need of accommodations, including closed captioning, please reach out to the committee or the Office of Congressional Accessibility Services. Well, this is the last hearings we have scheduled for this subcommittee to discuss the President's budget for fiscal year 2023. And of course, the last hearing with Senator Blunt on the other side of the dais. And after all of the issues that we have worked through together, I can't think of a more fitting tribute to that partnership than a bill that continues that legacy of making meaningful bipartisan investments to help families in my home state of Washington, in Missouri, and across the country. So I just want to say that my hope is after today, we'll be able to come together quickly in a bipartisan way, as we have so many times in the past, to turn to the hard work of writing our FY23 appropriations bills and getting in a good position to pass everything before the end of the year. Families are counting on us to get that done. I hope we can all agree it's critical to continue strengthening our economy, building off the progress we made thanks to the American Rescue Plan and last year's appropriations bills. Under President Biden, we have added another around 8.7 million jobs. That's an all-time high, and unemployment is near all-time lows at 3.6%. Meanwhile, the pension relief we passed has already given a lifeline to struggling businesses and saved the pensions of tens of thousands of workers and retirees who are at risk of having their financial situation turned upside down. Now, that progress is good, but we still have a lot of work ahead to build a stronger, fairer economy that truly works for workers, not just those at the very top and giant corporations. And right now, inflation is a serious challenge that we need to get our arms around. So we need to bring down everyday costs for the basics like groceries and gas and more that so many families are struggling with today. That's why Democrats are working to lower the cost of prescription drugs and health coverage, and why I believe we need to lower the child care costs for families and fix our broken child care system that is on the verge of collapse. We've got to get it done through reconciliation before it's too late, because it's plain as day, the child care crisis is holding our economy back. It is keeping so many parents, especially moms, out of the workforce and making it so much harder for businesses to find the workers that they need. I have put forward a plan that will lower child care costs for families across the country by thousands of dollars a year, reach more than 1 million new children and their families, raise wages for child care workers and stabilize the sector, keeping providers' doors open and making more options available to families, and ultimately to strengthen our entire economy. I'm going to keep pushing with everything I have to get that done. Now, Secretary Walsh, I'm glad you were able to hear directly from workers in my home state of Washington about the challenges that they're facing when you visited a few months ago. And I'm especially glad to see that President Biden's budget takes to heart so much of what the people in my state had to share with you. We have important work ahead to protect workers' rights, to raise wages, to make sure we have decent, safe, fair working conditions, and deliver high-quality workforce development opportunities. And the increased funding for the Labor Department in this budget will help us get it done with many much-needed investments. First, it would provide resources to help fix and strengthen our unemployment insurance systems, which so many people rely on when they hit hard times and are looking for their next job, and which this pandemic has shown is broken in far too many ways. This should be a reliable lifeline for people so they can get back on their feet. But back in my state and in several others, our unemployment programs have been undermined by fraud, outdated technology, and massive data hacks. We have to do better for families, and that starts with providing the resources we need to actually update IT programs and fix the system. This budget will also help people who are working to find good, high-paying jobs by increasing support for registered apprenticeships and other high-quality workforce development programs so they can provide quality opportunities in even more industries and occupations, and reach more women, people of color, formerly incarcerated individuals, people with disabilities, and others who are too often left out. Because you shouldn't have to have a college degree to make a decent living in this country. Of course, the department must do more than provide workers new opportunities. We need to be bold in protecting their rights as well. That's why it's so important this budget invests in the worker protection agencies charged with ensuring employers respect workers' rights and follow federal laws. Better enforcing these laws will help make sure workers are paid the wages they've earned, not shortchanged on overtime or denied minimum wage, get the family and medical leave they are eligible for, and go to work in a safe and healthy workplace. For too long, the number of investigators in the wage and hour division has been declining. We actually just hit a 50-year low. Too often, the division simply cannot investigate wage theft at huge, very well-resourced corporations. So I think we need to level the playing field for workers to make sure they are getting a fair shake. And these resources will allow us to crack down on employers who don't pay employees the overtime pay they are owed, pay workers less than prevailing wages required under law, and otherwise cheat employees out of the pay they earned. These investments won't just provide accountability to businesses, they will put money directly back in workers' pockets where it belongs. Meanwhile, increased resources for the International Labor Affairs Bureau will protect workers here at home from unfair competition when foreign companies don't play by the rules, ensuring our trading partners follow through on their commitment to workers' rights and keep our nation competitive on the world stage. And increased investments in the Office of Federal Contract Compliance will help ensure employers working for the government follow the law, including protecting against workplace discrimination and harassment. And when it comes to enforcing labor laws, this pandemic has put a harsh spotlight on how critical workplace health and safety laws are. We need the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to do more to live up to its responsibility here. In 2020, our country lost an average of 15 people to workplace injuries every day. Every day, 15 loved ones never made it home, and workplace deaths like these are disproportionately workers of color. That is heartbreaking. We have to do better, which is why it's critical this budget bolsters support for OSHA's mission to keep workers safe on the job and protected from retaliation for calling out safety and health issues in the workplace. It's also why I'm continuing to push OSHA to move quickly to finally issue a permanent COVID-19 standard for healthcare workers and work on a permanent infectious disease standard as well. Healthcare workers have been on the front line of this pandemic. They have worked tirelessly to save the lives of countless patients, but they have faced grave danger during this pandemic just trying to do their jobs. COVID-19 has killed over 5,000 nurses and healthcare professionals. We owe it to each and every one of our healthcare heroes to keep them safe. So, Mr. Secretary, I expect to see the permanent COVID safety standard from the department soon. We should have had one already. Workers cannot keep waiting. It's clear to me, and I think it's clear to everyone listening, that we have more work to do to support our workers and their families. So I'm going to keep pushing to make sure families have a little less stress on their shoulders and a little more money in their pockets. That means bringing down costs across the board on things like groceries and gas and healthcare and childcare and everyday essentials. It means ensuring workers get paid a fair living wage and are not cheated out of it, and go to work confident they will be coming home safely. It means making sure they can choose to care for themselves and their loved ones without losing the paycheck they need, and can learn new skills if they want to pursue a new career in a higher paying field. And it absolutely means ensuring we protect workers' rights, especially the right to join or form a union, to collectively bargain for better benefits, better health care, better retirement plans, and higher wages. I'm glad to say this budget makes clear the Biden administration is also committed to these goals, and President Biden understands as well as anyone that working families are the heart of our country and the backbone of our economy. Democrats are focused on the economy, Mr. Secretary. We are focused on tackling inflation, lowering costs, and making sure working people get a fair shake and their fair share. So I look forward to working with you and the President to keep building an economy that puts those working people first. With that, I will turn it over to Senator Blunt for his remarks.
Well, thank you, Chair Murray, and good morning to everybody participating in the hearing, and welcome, Secretary Walsh. I look forward to your testimony on the Department of Labor's FY 2023 budget request. Last year when you testified before the subcommittee, a principal topic, and certainly a topic I raised, was how the COVID-19 pandemic had put an unprecedented strain on our economy and on our workforce. At the time, I had serious concerns that our country wouldn't return to our pre-pandemic unemployment levels, which had been the lowest since the late 1960s. And while I'm pleased that we're making real progress in lowering the unemployment rate, I'm concerned about the very real economic and labor shifts that have occurred since the last time we had a hearing and you were before this committee. I'm talking, of course, about the economic impact of inflation, an invisible tax that takes its toll on every American, but it's particularly burdensome for those who can least afford it. Many of the increases in paychecks have been more than offset by increases in what you have to pay for, and it only takes a trip to the gas station or the grocery store to know for most families exactly what that means. In recent months, that inflation numbers been above 8%, the highest rate in over 40 years. And the Treasury Secretary recently testified before the Senate Finance Committee that inflation was here to stay for any foreseeable future. This administration's inflation forecast has already showed prices rising this year at nearly twice the pre-pandemic rate. And while we might disagree on the root causes of this historic inflation, that's really reversing those economic gains made in the past, I do believe we can agree that every American is feeling the impact. History's told us that we can't spend our way out of inflation. Instead, we have to exercise fiscal responsibility and be prudent about determining what is truly needed to right the ship and begin to head things in a different direction. Additionally, we're seeing major labor shifts that I think will impact the labor market for years to come. Dubbed by some the Great Resignation, we've watched record numbers of employees resign following the COVID-19 pandemic, and that was particularly apparent and evident in the young adult population. Simultaneously, help wanted signs are still visible almost everywhere across the country as businesses and employers continue to search for workers to fill the vacancies they have. There's no question that this is a turbulent moment in our country's history, particularly our economic history, but often during the times like this of economic and market uncertainty, we have the opportunity to rethink the way we've been doing things and prioritize programs that provide the most benefit, in the case of the Department of Labor, to workers and employers alike. This is why I was surprised to see the FY 2023 budget doubling down on new programs and funding levels that were rejected just 3 months ago in the FY 2022 bill. The FY 23 proposed budget for the Department of Labor totals $14.9 billion, an increase of almost $2 billion and nearly 13% over the appropriations bill that we just passed. That's nearly triple the increase that was provided in that bill. Wouldn't expect to see that if I was you. And we want to be talking about what those priorities really are. Funding such as $100 million for the Power Plus initiative, which will transition workers away from jobs in the fossil fuel industry to what would be considered generally green jobs, is not included in the FY 22 final bill. And here it is, that $100 million is right back in this budget request. Similarly, Career Pathways for Youth Grants, a program that I began as chairman in 2020 to ensure that young adults in this country have adequate knowledge before they get there of all the post-secondary options that they need to know about to be informed about what their pathway really is. I agree with the chairman's view that there are a lot of ways to get to a successful career and a successful life that allows you to do the things that are best suited for the kind of life you want to lead. And we need to be sure that we're not just looking at one pathway. I think so much of education, secondary education, has been focused on only one way forward for a long time. And that's why we try to fund. I think the funding was about $15 million to look at career pathways early in the education process so that people in junior high school, middle school, and high school begin to get a sense of what kinds of jobs that are out there. I was surprised you didn't ask for the continuation of that program. Why is the funding for workers to transition out of their current stable career for jobs in industries that the administration prefers being prioritized, and looking at how the future labor force gets ready for the work that they would want to do isn't? We need to ensure that our labor programs are nimble and can adequately and appropriately address unexpected workforce challenges. For example, while I supported funding for registered apprenticeships, the registered apprenticeship model is underutilized by industries that need it the most, such as healthcare and IT and cybersecurity, because it's just not been a very flexible model. And I hope we can work with you to find more flexibility in that whole concept of apprenticeships. I've said it before and I'll say it again. We need to create an environment for Americans to thrive, and we need to target our federal resources to cultivating the workforce of the future. It's wrong for the federal government to dictate what that workforce should look like, and for bureaucrats in Washington to determine the speed in which we get there. That should be left up to states and communities and local economies. I believe we can work together to find consensus on the department's budget. I look forward to working with you, Mr. Secretary, as well as Chair Murray and our colleagues on the subcommittee to once again come up with a bill that prioritizes bipartisan initiatives and innovation in the workforce system. As the chair mentioned, this is my last likely hearing on the labor appropriations part of this budget, but we've had good success working together, finding ways to find a path forward. I certainly hope we can do that. I want to thank all my colleagues for their support over the time I've been on this committee, and particularly Chair Murray for the great working relationship we've had. Again, thank you for your time here today. Secretary Walsh, I look forward to working with you to strengthen our nation's workforce and create a more prosperous economy for all Americans. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blunt. With that, our witness today is Marty Walsh, Secretary of the Department of Labor. Secretary Walsh, thank you for joining us today. Look forward to your testimony. You may begin.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Murray and Ranking Member Blunt. Thank you as well, members of the committee that are here today and that will be coming in and out. I want to thank you for your opportunity to testify in front of you today. I'm certainly pleased to outline the Biden-Harris administration's priority for the Department of Labor's fiscal year 2023 budget. My mission as Secretary, quite honestly, of Labor is to empower all workers, morning, noon, and night. Frontline workers who carried us through the worst days of the pandemic, the marginalized workers who face barriers to employment opportunities, the veterans who serve our nation, the rural workers who we serve through targeted workforce grants. The Department of Labor, quite honestly, stands with all workers in every community to build stronger, more resilient, and more inclusive economy. I'm certainly proud of all that the department's accomplished in the past year and the folks that work with me every single day. We implemented key provisions of the President's American Rescue Plan, supporting health care and pensions and unemployment insurance. We protected workers from COVID-19 and heat exposure. We strengthened retirement security and access to mental health services. We expanded career training programs to connect more Americans to opportunities that they, quite honestly, need. Ranking Member Blunt talked a little bit about people resigning, putting those people back into better paying jobs, connecting more industry as well to skilled workers. We implemented the President's $15 an hour minimum wage for federal contracts, legislation to stop surprise billing, medical billing, protections for tip workers. We advanced government-wide initiatives to support workers' organizing rights, climate action, and infrastructure implementation. In all of our work, we're committed to equity for the most vulnerable workers in communities all across America. And we have in this moment a unique opportunity to help all workers thrive. The President's plan have produced historic job recovery. Congress has made major investment in workers through the bipartisan infrastructure law. In the Department of Labor, the Good Jobs Initiative, we're partnering across government to make sure these investments create good jobs and access to all. And I'm committed to supporting the congressional efforts to invest in the workforce training, child care support, education, health care, and things that, quite honestly, families depend upon. The fiscal 2023 budget submission builds on these investments and renews our pledge to serve workers, job seekers, and retirees all across America. Workforce development is a vitally important area of opportunity. High-quality job training lifts workers into the middle class and increase equity in our economy. These programs meet the talent needs of employers and strengthens our supply chain. That's why the President's this year's budget, $303 million, we're looking to expand registered apprenticeships. I agree with you, Senator Blunt, about creating opportunities into other industries, and we have been working on that, and that's really what we need to do in America more. We have $100 million for career training in growing industry sectors, $100 million for community college partnerships with employers. I have visited community colleges in dozens of states across this country. I have visited dozens of Job Corps centers around this country, and I see innovative programs designed in collaboration with employers working for students of all backgrounds. We need to invest in these partnerships and reach out to more employers, and we need to provide more workers with better opportunities for their future. This budget also increased funding for veterans through our Veterans Employment and Training Service Agency. It increases funding for our Women's Bureau to expand access for women's career where they are underrepresented. This budget invests $2.2 billion in the department's worker protection agencies. This work is more essential now than ever to rebuild our staffing levels, as you said, Madam Chair, in your very first line. That includes OSHA's efforts to double the number of inspectors by the end of the President's first term. It will restore MSHA's capacity for enforcement and mine plan equipment reviews. It would restore staffing for the Employment Benefit and Security Administration to protect workers, health retirements, and disabilities. It would increase funding for wage and hour to safeguard our wages for the most vulnerable workers. It would fund the Office of Federal Contract Compliance to ensure federal contracting advances America's promise of fairness for all workers. This budget increases funding to the Office of Labor Solicitor to rebuild the entire department's capacity to enforce the laws that are on the books. We also have requested the resources for the Bureau of International Labor Affairs. ILAB ensures our training partners uphold their labor commitments so America's workers can compete on a level playing field. The budget fully funds and updates the state funding formula for unemployment insurance. That would be the first comprehensive update in decades. It allows states to serve claimants more effectively, and our request includes $150 million to strengthen the integrity of the system. Finally, the budget requests nearly $4 million to support the Good Jobs Initiative. This enables us to advance the President's priorities of good jobs and free and fair choice to join the union. And I just want to touch briefly, before I end my remarks, on inflation. Certainly the President has talked to all the Cabinet. It's an all-of-government approach to bring down those pressures at the kitchen table, to bring down those pressures at the gas pump, to bring down those pressures at the grocery store. The President, his administration, did not cause inflation, but we certainly are not running away from inflation because it impacts every single American person, and we need to do everything in our power to bring those pressures down. This is a worldwide challenge that's happening in other countries around the globe, but we need to focus what we're doing here in America. So I look forward to talking about that a little later. I see all of what we do everywhere I travel. Workers are showing up each and every day to move our communities and our nation forward. In return, we must do everything we can to ensure the well-being and empower them with opportunity. I want to thank you both and all the committee members once again for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to discussing our budget requests here with the committee, and certainly any time that anyone needs to reach out to the Department of Labor, you feel free to call me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Let me begin with something I referenced in my opening remarks, and that's that workers deserve to be safe at work. I'm concerned because right now we still do not have a COVID-19 workplace safety standard, and to me that's just really unacceptable, especially because because last year in a report by the Government Accountability Office on the federal response to the pandemic, GAO made clear that OSHA inspectors were facing challenges with COVID-19 cases without a specific standard. I have two questions for you, and let me start with the first. When will OSHA finalize a permanent COVID-19 standard for healthcare workers? And can you just give me a clear timeline here?
Sorry. I believe it'll be done in the next 3 to 6 months. We're going through the process now. I believe we're taking public comment, and we're moving through that final healthcare standard.
3 to 6 months from now?
Yes, yes. Because it's the rulemaking process, you know, the rulemaking process, and I mean, I'd love to speed it up, but unfortunately, it's a process that's in place that we have to work under.
Well, when will OSHA take the next steps on a permanent infectious disease standard, a process that was actually initiated more than a decade ago?
We're working on that as well right now, and I think that's in the same timeline. So OSHA made some priorities, and obviously we worked really hard on the rulemaking process that was struck down by the Supreme Court on vax or test situation, and then at the same time, that set us back a little bit on the infectious disease. Then we got back on track with this infectious disease. Now we're focused on that. And in my budget, we're looking for a little more money on some of the rulemaking processes because we have lots of issues that we cannot get to because we don't have, quite honestly, don't have the resources.
Okay, Mr. Secretary, funding in this budget, together with investments through the American Rescue Plan and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, can really help us have an equitable recovery from the pandemic. But unfortunately, jobs that pay low wages and lack benefits have been, and actually continue to be, disproportionately filled by women, people of color, people living in poverty, people with disabilities. And the painful reality is our workforce development systems have long struggled to address these inequities and too often leave out those same workers. And when we leave some people behind, it actually holds us all back. So tell me what specific steps you are taking to ensure our workforce development programs, including the Registered Apprenticeship Program, are supporting all of our workers, including women and people of color, so we can build a stronger economy.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Let me just first say that one of the things, when we think about the infrastructure investments, the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're thinking about making sure that it's equitable investment across the board. When I look at the unemployment numbers in America, 3.6% unemployment rate right now in America. In the white community, it's 3.4%. In the black community, it's 6.2%. Historically, the black unemployment number has always been historically double that of white, the white number all across the country. So when we think about making these investments, when we think about these investments, and we don't have, the Department of Labor isn't responsible for making a lot of investments in the infrastructure bill, because most of that is in transportation and in commerce and in energy. But what we've done is we've created, the Good Jobs Initiative is an umbrella of making sure that as we make these investments, we're making these investments to communities, so we're not leaving people behind. We're not leaving opportunities for women. We're not leaving opportunities for people of color. We're not leaving opportunities for Native American, Alaskan, Indian, all of the different communities in our community, quite honestly, that have been underrepresented for so long. So that's one of the ways that we're looking through the Good Jobs Initiative to make sure that this is an equitable investment in people's future. We also, quite honestly, in the workforce development programs and grants, we're looking at expanding apprenticeships and registered apprenticeship programs. We're looking at doing more pre-apprenticeship programs to really create a pathway into different industries. When you take the issue of nursing, we are headed towards a crisis in nursing in America in the next 5 to 10 years if we don't address it today. We have 60,000 people, young people, on waiting lists to get into nursing programs in the country, and we have a shortage coming. So when you look at that, we have certainly an ability to create a talent pool to go into nursing. What we want to do is make sure we're making the right investments to make sure to see what the shortfalls are in those different industries. We did it with the trucking challenge. We had an issue at the ports with a lack of truck drivers. We sat down at the White House, myself, Secretary Buttigieg. We created a program, an apprenticeship program, where any company in America could sign up with the Department of Labor for an apprenticeship, and within 48 hours, we would turn that around and get that program running. We had over 100 companies right now in America that are currently having apprenticeships in trucking in America. We are working about building the future. We're looking at the numbers and the ages of truck drivers in America. Do they need to be 21 to 25? It's okay.
Well, hold on just a minute. We apparently have a...
Professional reporting studio, but this is the exact same tape we heard earlier.
Yeah.
Like asking, why is this coming over the feed?
We apparently have a radio coming over the feed. I don't know. Control the feed.
Everyone who was injured or hurt was in the 9th grade, me including. A lot of people either don't know about or forget about the trauma that every day it feels like the shooting is happening here, it happened yesterday, or it will happen tomorrow. People affected by everything going on have to walk by the street corner where their best friend, their brother, their mother, their nephew, or they themselves were shot. That trauma, once inflicted, doesn't leave.
Sometimes when I'm like, I really, this is sometimes
Two locations.
We're- some kind of weird radio thing coming in the committee room, so we're still there for just a second. I'm just told, I'm in class, we're still going. Did it stop? Okay. Mr. Secretary, I believe the outside feed has stopped. We will continue with our hearing. You were talking about specific worker training skills, and I'll just take a few seconds and just ask. Worker training is critically important, but I'm also concerned about those support services that allow somebody to go to work.
Yeah.
I'm talking about childcare, transportation, those kinds of barriers. Can you just address that really quickly, how the department's
real quick. I mean, I think in the childcare space and in the, that's one of the biggest challenges we have as a country. And when you think about, yesterday I had testified in front of Ed and Labor, and childcare was a big part of the conversation. And quite honestly, you know, I think as a country we have to look and see and realign what we do with childcare. The pandemic has been devastating to childcare industries. In the very beginning days of the pandemic, March of 2020, we saw many childcare facilities have to shut down because the kids weren't going there and there was no revenue coming in. A lot of those agencies didn't recover. They had workers, particularly women of color, working in those areas that were making minimum wage and very low wages. Those workers left there, found other options for employment because they had to. And now as we think about the childcare industry, rebuilding it, we have to really be really intentional about it. And I feel that when we talk about childcare, you know, it has to be an all-of-government approach, meaning the federal, the state, the local, but also the private sector. We really have to think about outside the box when it comes to childcare. And also universal pre-kindergarten is an opportunity for us as well to think about additional childcare. So as we think about this, our office, the Women's Bureau is working very intently on this, and also through the Good Jobs Initiative, we're looking at different ways of supporting communities across America.
Thank you very much. Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary, let's go back to my comment on career pathways. I think it's really important that people, certainly in high school, begin to get a sense of what jobs are out there, what the job satisfaction of those jobs is like, what the comparative salary level of those jobs is compared to other jobs. And let's be sure people have choices. In that career pathways account, we started that put it in FY 2020. This, in the most recent bill, we provided $15 million, which was an increase of $5 million. Your department last June gave the first awards under this program were made through the 2020 funding. As you start making decisions, what are you going to do about this program, and how are you going to monitor the success of the awards you've already given?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, Senator, I certainly agree with you in career pathways being an important aspect to make sure we continue to fund in this budget, because many young people in America, as was said in actually both of your opening statements, not everyone's on a pathway to college, and we have to make sure we're creating pathways into different careers. We did this program was not dropped out of the budget. We didn't specifically call it out in the 2023 budget. We actually requested an increase of $226 million for the National Dislocated Reserve, which funds these grants. So it's part of the National Dislocated Funds, which funds these grants. And one other thing, to be more clarifying this, I will absolutely work with you in your office afterwards to make sure that this is very clear, that we understand that these pathways monies are still in the budget. We actually look for an increase.
Well, let's do that, because your staff told us just a couple of days ago you specifically didn't request money in this category. So let's talk about, not today, but let's follow up and talk about what we intend to do there, how we're going to monitor the grants that are already out there. And I think what the chair and I have tried to focus on in the committee has been being sure people have the information they need and then the opportunities they need to pursue as quickly as they can the jobs they'd like to have, rather than spending years after high school searching for the information that they could have gotten while they were in high school or just after they got out of high school. And so we're going to continue to talk about that. On apprenticeships generally, how do we ensure that all of the industries that want to participate in the Registered Apprenticeship Program have a chance to do that?
Yeah, we're reaching out right now. We're sitting down with stakeholders. We're talking to industry about creating those pathways. I honestly feel in my heart that we're living in a unique moment in time. We're seeing people quit their jobs at high rates. We're seeing companies having a hard time finding people to go work for them. We're seeing young people that just can't connect to a good paying job. And I think the best way, in my opinion, is looking at apprenticeships in different industries, in the healthcare sector, in the IT sector. You see it in the building trades and you see it in the trucking now, how it's working. We take that model that's working in those industries. I also want to add a component of pre-apprenticeship, so young people have the opportunity. I was over in Germany a couple weeks ago. I was at Volkswagen, and I met with the leadership of the Volkswagen company, and I saw the technology in there. But I met with about 20 young people between the ages of 16 and 18 years old that were apprenticeship. They were in apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship at Volkswagen, and they were getting a stipend, but they were also learning on-the-job training, not necessarily how to use the machinery, but they were getting skills in coding and how to use technology. And I asked them, I said, they go to school a couple days a week and they're in the company a couple days a week. We need to start thinking of those models that we're seeing in Europe that have been so successful in apprenticeship in Switzerland. So we are working on those.
Okay, good. On H-2B visas, the part-time workers, this is a big issue in a lot of sectors of our economy, particularly the tourist sector. And if you don't have those part-time workers, the full-time jobs go away. We need to be sure that people understand that there are seasonal jobs where if you don't have the seasonal workers ready to come in and take the seasonal jobs, then the jobs for other people that are full-time, year-round jobs go away, because the whole process just doesn't work. That's particularly evident in tourism. And in the last edition of workers, and I think the department has expanded the program in a significant way, about 121,000 H-2B visas, but the last 35,000 of those were gone within 5 business days. Once you said we're going to have 35,000 new opportunities, they were gone within 5 days. How are we monitoring that? And would you help me express the importance of being sure those kinds of jobs are filled for people who work alongside part-time workers and have full-time jobs they wouldn't have if those part-time workers weren't there?
Yeah, let me, first and foremost, I had a meeting with my office last week to talk about the H-2B program, about the distribution of the visas, because some of the senators here at this table and other members of the Congress and Senate have called me, both Democrats and Republicans, about it. And the increase in interest in this program, in the thousands of companies that are now applying for these visas, have exceeded, we've never seen as much business or as much interest in this program. So we're having conversations. I think what we need to do with the H-2B visa program, and we're doing some internal conversations, I think we need to have a real honest conversation about what the future of the program should look like. We expanded this year in the first round of H-2B visas, I want to say 22,000 visas. In the second round, we added another 35,000. That's the largest allotment additionally of H-2B visas since the program was revamped in 2013. And the need or the desire to be getting these programs are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And what's happening is a lot of companies that are filling out applications for these programs, they're doing it wrong because they've never done it before, and they get disqualified. So all of the people that know what they're doing are getting their applications in, and they get these grants. That's one problem. The second problem is, and we had this conversation, as I said the other day, we talked about the different industries in America. You have sugar down the south. You have the crabbing industry on the coast. You have the fishing industry in Alaska. We're thinking about how do we make sure when we create these extra allotments, is there a way for us to be able to put some allotments aside? Because if it comes out in April, then the farmers might get all the H-2B visas, but you need something in September or October for a different harvest or something like that. So we're looking at the program right now on how do we make this program, I wouldn't say more efficient, more successful. This program is needed. I'm a supporter of the program, quite honestly, because in a lot of areas that it's really difficult to get workers in a short period of time. These companies, we ask these companies to two things. One is to make sure there's strong labor protections for the workers that come from the southern border, number one, and Haiti and some other places. And number two, we want to make sure that they do their due diligence in trying to hire local American workers prior to them getting H-2B visas. So we're asking them those two things. Like, make sure you make an honest effort to look for workers, number one. And number two, we ask them as well to make sure they treat their workers fairly.
Good. I'd be more than happy to work with you and your staff on this. It's a problem. It's a problem we've dealt with for a long time. I think the numbers you've put out there this year are as aggressive on this program as anybody's ever been. But the work environment is different than any environment we've ever been in, and that's why it makes some sense. But I'd love to work with you on it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair. Secretary, nice to see you again, and really enjoyed our conversation the other day. I know you're a big fan of the Job Corps. Hawaii Job Corps is one of the best in the nation, regularly at capacity and really delivering on the mission. I want to talk to you about the pay. DOL exempts Job Corps contracts from the Service Contract Act, which means the Job Corps employees don't get prevailing wages and benefits. My understanding is that's an administrative authority that you have. You could waive that, but you don't have the money. And so the question is pretty simple. Would the department consider rescinding the exemption if Congress provides the resources to do so?
Yes.
Good enough for me. And if so, can you provide the committee with the amount of funding that would be required to do so?
I will get that number for you, but I appreciate you asking me that question. I think, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but I think Job Corps is one of the most underutilized programs that we have in the federal government, that we could have 57,000 people a year that go to Job Corps prepared for a job. And when a young person leaves Job Corps, and I look forward to visiting your district and seeing the Job Corps there, they should be guaranteed a job when they graduate Job Corps.
Thank you very much. And speaking of job placement, this is a sort of broader question. I want you to imagine, say, 10 years from now, 5 or 10 years from now, what's the Department of Labor's online presence, online training resources look like? Coming from state government, more than a decade ago, the implementation of the of federal workforce training programs is very siloed. We've got workforce development board that meets as a committee of the whole with maybe more than 100 people, and they ratify their workforce development plan, mostly based on the fact that if they ratify it, they get their revenue. And so there's not a lot of big picture thinking. And I'm wondering whether there is a way to turn the Department of Labor's website and other online presence into a real resource for workers so they can not just find jobs, because there are plenty of private sector platforms for that, but figure out what the college and career readiness pathways are, what kind of technical training you need. All of it is a labyrinth if you're new to the workforce or if you're transitioning from one job to the other. And so this is a broader question. What does that website look like if you have all the resources in the world in 10 years so that it's really servicing people in a new economy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think number one, it's in 10 years from now, we get to expand our American job centers that do that work on the ground in cities and towns all across America, number one. Number two, if there's a worker in America that's looking to make a change in their career or put themselves in a better situation, they should be able to click a few buttons, get to a resource guide on the Department of Labor that directs them to their state or their city that has the ability, there's a partnership with the federal government in creating a pathway into a good paying job. So for example, if you live in a small town in Hawaii and you're looking for a job, well, the Department of Labor might not know who the employers are there, but we work collectively with the local government to make sure that that resource is there. It does two things. Number one, it would allow the person, the individual, to be able to find the resources, but as important, it will allow employers to also find the people. So you'd have to work with the employers as well to make sure that they're part of the system, because the employers, if they feel that it's a good training opportunity and the resources being spent well in good workforce development, then we're helping employers grow. We saw this year in this country 4.7 million people go into entrepreneurship on their own, 20% increase in the past. Some of those folks are going to become companies. Some of those folks are going to become big companies. Some of those folks are going to be looking for employees. The best way to do that is having the resources. So I think it's about both sides, tying the worker to the job and the job to the worker.
Thank you. Final question. I have a skepticism about bureaus, and so I pushed on my staff about the Women's Bureau. I said, what has the Women's Bureau actually done for women? And they've done an extraordinary amount. Yeah. For women, helping with the Equal Pay Act, the FMLA, and they can also be credited for helping to ensure women were included in laws providing minimum wage and overtime. Do I have your commitment to continue to support the Women's Bureau so that it can build on the successes from the last century?
Yeah, when I first became Secretary of Labor, the first thing I did was I asked for an increase in budget for the Women's Bureau. When I was mayor of Boston, we had a Women's Commission in Boston, and I changed it from a commission to an office in the Bureau. We need to give the Women's Bureau more power in the Department of Labor, as well as the Veterans Office as well.
Final, just a comment. I want to thank you for your decision to include data on American Indians, Alaska Natives in the last monthly report, and look forward to working with you in this space.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing that up, because I think I misspoke in the very beginning in my comment about the numbers. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Ranking Member, and thank you for being here today, Mr. Secretary, and I certainly appreciate your help with my labor issue with the catfish processing plant in Mississippi. And one of the things I want to talk about is this administration continues to blame President Putin for this inflation. And despite the price increases going through the roof, but the administration, in my opinion, got it wrong when they kept insisting that this is transitory. And, it's been proven that it's anything but transitory, but the Biden administration has expressed that the United States is prepared for this and positioned to meet the challenges of this stagflation, giving the strong labor market. But employment levels are still way below pre-pandemic levels. So how can this possibly be true that we're positioned with the employment levels being so low that we're positioned to overcome this?
Thank you very much, Senator. Let me just begin by, there's no question that inflation, we all know this is causing pain for families in America. rising energy costs, food prices, stretching budgets all across the United States to very thin. But this is also an issue that Europe and UK are dealing with as well. So there is no question. There's two things that we cannot deny. Number one is the economic challenges we've had over the last 2.5 years due to the pandemic, shutting America down, and tens of millions of Americans not going to work, and not having really a strong plan for that because we weren't prepared for a pandemic. Last time was pandemic was 100 years ago, and what Vladimir Putin is doing in Ukraine is an atrocity, number one, and number two, absolutely is having stresses on the global economic crisis. I was with the president last week. We were talking about wheat. There's wheat in Ukraine that we can't get out of Ukraine because Russia's blocking the exportation out of Ukraine. We have oil that we're not taking from Russia. We have countries that aren't taking oil. So we can't deny the fact that those challenges aren't adding to inflation. The president is been very clear on lowering the costs that families have in front of them. He's also focused on reducing the deficit. I'm working with myself. 8.7 million Americans have gone back to work since the end of the pandemic. I shouldn't say the end of the pandemic. Since the pandemic kind of began and is moving forward, we have the lowest unemployment since 1970. And I've identified that we do have a problem in our country with making sure we're creating pathways for people to connect them to jobs. And that's why I've asked for the increase in this budget in workforce development programs, in job training programs, in community college programs, and also in apprenticeship programs, and creating better pathways for people.
How's the Labor Department adjusting or correcting its policies to address the issues of these small businesses that are having such a time trying to fill these positions and related to the hardships placed on the American families?
Yeah, well, I'm willing and certainly willing to talk to any businesses and communities around America to talk about ideas. I spent a lot of my time, as Labor Secretary, I spent a good amount of time reaching out and talking to businesses as well in America, probably as much more time than I talked to, quite honestly, unions in America. And because I find it's really important to understand the challenges that businesses, particularly small businesses, are having in our country. And small businesses, the biggest challenges, well, they have a lot of challenges right now, particularly with the pandemic, but their challenges now are trying to find workers that want to work in those different industries. So we absolutely will. If there's industries that you or companies that you want me to talk to, I would love to.
And I agree, obviously, that the Russian invasion has had a lot to do with this, but I also wholeheartedly believe that shutting down the Keystone Pipeline is what started it before the invasion. And employee retention, particularly in the manufacturing and the warehousing sectors, is a highly significant issue and quite a problem in the workforce today, obviously. But more and more companies find it hard to hire and retain workers for roles that normally have high turnovers, that are repetitive task jobs. And it seems that the opportunity to utilize technology could be a solution to fill these positions while also creating a higher skilled position for the programming and operations of such things as collaborative robots. And I believe this concept could be a game changer to reduce turnover while increasing higher wages in the workers for these positions that so many people have difficult dealing with, but it's just, with the manufacturing that they're in. Does the department share this view, and will you provide any insight into the department's focus in this area?
Yeah, certainly the president is very supportive of creating more and it's expanding manufacturing in America. And I know I can't lobby for legislation, but I would hope that we can get the Bipartisan Innovation Act through Congress so that we can continue to make investments in American workers, in manufacturing. Some of that will be industrial manufacturing, and some of that will be technology in manufacturing. And I think that we have such a great opportunity in front of us. I don't want to say I said this yesterday, and I probably shouldn't say it today, but I think that this Bipartisan Innovation Act is actually one of the biggest pieces of legislation for the future of our economy and for the future of our workforce moving forward.
Thank you, and my time is up.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Secretary Walsh. I know our chair asked you earlier about the importance of childcare in terms of getting people back to work, but I have a more specific question to ask you about. Wisconsin is using a Department of Labor grant to test out an apprenticeship program that would train workers who enter the early childhood education and child care workforce. Expanding this type of apprenticeship, in my mind, could have a real multiplier effect. So not only would it address severe shortages in the child care workforce and industry, but by increasing the supply of available providers, it would free up more parents to be able to look at full-time work. And by filling open positions, we might even reduce inflation by helping businesses increase their production. So how can the department encourage investment in child care apprenticeship programs to reduce the workforce shortages and increase the output of our economy?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the question, and I'm encouraged to see what's happening in Wisconsin, to see how that works. And I think that having programs like that around the country to check is really important. This budget request that we're asking for is $303 million for apprenticeships to further expand, modernize, diversified registered apprenticeships by investing in high-quality youth and pre-apprenticeship models. So we're doing it, you're doing it in Wisconsin, we're doing it here with the trucking challenge here in Washington and around the country, quite honestly. We're looking at other areas, we're looking at healthcare, we're looking at IT. There's no question, when you think about the child care industry, number one, the challenges they have. Number one, they have a challenge with funding. And the funding is not consistent in every state. Sometimes the states fund it, sometimes the cities fund it, the federal government's funding it to some degree. That's one challenge. The second challenge is recruiting and retaining talent. And having that pipeline, that young person pipeline, or that pipeline into that industry where people can get paid while they're learning on the job training is going to be really important. Number two. Number three, the president filed a bill that really deals with the cost of child care. I think that the latest bill, if I'm not mistaken, is family earns $150,000 collectively. They pay no more than 7% of their salary for child care. That's another important aspect of it, making it affordable for families at the kitchen table. And the last thing, which is the first thing that you talked about, it really is not just about training people into this industry, but making sure we're paying them and treating them fairly. Because long-term sustainability of the child care industry is key. Long-term sustainability of our economy is key, and they go hand in hand.
Thank you. Last month, I introduced the Workplace Violence for Healthcare and Social Service Workers Act. It would require Osha to set an enforceable standard to require healthcare employers to establish plans to prevent workplace violence. Incidents of workplace violence have increased significantly during the pandemic, but were high for healthcare workers and social workers prior to the beginning of the pandemic. And frankly, our healthcare heroes have been put through hell and certainly deserve better from all of us. The need for action was made even more tragically clear by a deadly shooting at a hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma, just a few weeks ago. So I know this item has been on OSHA's regulatory agenda. I wonder if you can update me and the committee on the status of the workplace violence rule.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, no one, as you know, should lose their life on the job for whatever reason, or even concerned about losing their life on the job. And I know the administration strongly supports the passage of your bill, which is really important. And in the meantime, OSHA has also worked extremely hard and has successfully prosecuted several important workplace violence cases under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So we've done that. OSHA continues to issue citations in this space, so thank you for that. And the last thing is, I said it earlier to the chairwoman, I believe that we're on pace, hopefully, to get some final rule in the next 3 to 6 months.
Okay. Final question. This week, a GAO report examining states' execution of the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program found significant racial disparities in the rate of approval. The report recommended that as a part of efforts to modernize the unemployment system, that Department of Labor examine the potential causes of racial and ethnic disparities. Will you commit to making that examination as recommended by GAO? And do you have any insights at this point?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, the department is focused right now on both fixing and the short and long-term issues with the unemployment system. You know, we've announced the availability of more than $715 million in grants, fundings for states. We have Tiger teams that are out working. We're working on improvement to the identity verification tools within the UI program. We're working on equity grants. We're piloting programs. I feel really good where we are right now in this process because we have both states, Democrat, Republican governor states, that are very active with us in the UI reform. So I feel good where it's at. Eventually, I mean, I asked for an increase in funding this year, but eventually states are going to have to really step up if they really want to make their systems equitable across the board. When I say step up, I mean making investments by stepping up.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Senator Braun has joined us. Are you ready to go, or you want 5 minutes? Senator Braun, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to be talking to you again. I just attended earlier today the National Federation of Independent Business Owners, and I and another congresswoman were answering questions that they have. And many there are concerned in general about Main Street businesses. My wife has had one since 1978 in our downtown. Some of the stuff that happened through COVID, a lot of those businesses got shut down. And many of them are grappling with all the issues we hear every day, a lot pre-COVID, workforce. There's a particular part of the economy, though, the gig economy, and independent contractors, Main Street business owners, that so many of them, to me, are so analogous to blue-collar workers because they actually live out of these businesses. And I've always been a proponent in running my own business for 37 years at high wages, great benefits, safe workplace, no turnover. And I think that generally, Main Street America, smaller businesses do all of that. Let's focus on the gig economy, particularly independent contractors. It seems like, and they think that the current administration is trying to, take their way of life away. They looked at the PRO Act. They look at some of the things that are being done. I would like your general comment on why we would look at them any differently from the good blue-collar worker that most of us employ for those same reasons. Why would we want to do anything that would diminish their way of living? Because to me, they are that.
No, thank you, Senator. And in a lot of cases, independent contractors, people who are independently employed, do great work. And they are part of our economy. And they're part of our, in some cases, part of our main streets. We see it in trucking, and we see it in different industries. The concern that I've always had when it comes to independent contracting is folks that are under the understanding that they are hired as employees, and then they're paid with a 1099, and they're not technically, they're actually an employee of a company. And I think that there's many different definitions of the concerns that people have in that. And that's kind of where, when I say this, I'll speak for myself personally, that I've always gotten concerned. An example of that is a restaurant where somebody gets hired as a dishwasher, and then all of a sudden they're being paid with a 1099, and they have no repercussion at all. They're really not an independent contractor. They're a dishwasher who works for a company. And we've been able, the Department of Labor over the years has gone back and claimed lost wages for people that have been characterized or described in those different areas. But when you talk about Main Street, I hear what you're saying. I mean, my former role, obviously, we had a lot of businesses that people might have had a flower shop, or they had something that they were in themselves, their own worker, they're independent. They kind of did their own thing, or they were a planner or things like that. I understand that.
So let's focus more closely on gig economy then, because I don't think you should game the system by issuing 1099s when technically that individual is an employee. That to me is maybe skirting the rules. But let's focus on gig economy. These are individual business owners, and they're worried too that just by that they're going to be drawn into that independent contractor issue and then lose their independence, their livelihood, because they would not be of that same category you're talking to. They are running their own businesses, and generally a business of one.
Yeah, in the gig economy, I mean, I've spent a lot, when I say a lot of time, I've spent a fair amount of time in talking to the gig economy companies here in America, both the leadership of the companies, the advocacy groups that are pro gig economy companies, and some of the other side that isn't pro gig economy. And I know that in a lot of states, California passed a ballot initiative, Washington State passed a law, and in Massachusetts yesterday, the Massachusetts Supreme Court just threw the ballot question for the gig economy, for the Uber and Lyfts, off the ballot. So basically saying you have to come up with legislation. So I know a lot of these conversations are happening in other places. I actually had a conversation last week, I'll be real quick on this, before I have another question, with Germany, talking about what they did with the gig economy in Germany. So just asking what was the path forward there. So we have not taken any action as a department, but I am still talking to all these groups.
Well, very good, because I think that in our unique economy, you've got anywhere from huge corporations that, to me, shoulder the biggest responsibility, and where unions definitely come into play because of the counterweight against that much financial power. Make sure that we don't take Main Street America in all of its individualism, kind of swept into a category that they're not part of. Because you never know when that individual, that gig business, that small business on Main Street becomes a larger business, and to realize most of them make their living out of that. They're not growing it with return on equity in mind.
And if you want to let the independent group that you spoke to today, they're more than welcome. I'd love to sit and talk to them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us here today. And thank you also for the visit that we had in March. I enjoyed our conversation, and we talked about apprenticeships there. So I'd like to ask a question. We have some excellent apprenticeship programs in our state, and I recently visited one at Marshall University's at the Manufacturing Tech Accelerator at the Robert C. Byrd Institute at Marshall. And it's providing participants with the skills they need to succeed in entry-level positions in manufacturing. You complete 2,000 hours of paid on-the-job training from a participating employer, and the apprentices will qualify for a certificate to be a manufacturing technician. I met a veteran there who had obtained this certification after retiring fully from his career in the military, and he's also now, excitingly, in the process of attaining a patent for an efficient manufacturing process that he created just months ago. Very, very impressive story. So after visiting RCBI and after our conversation, I'm wondering about your approach at labor on apprenticeships, whether it's organized labors or some such as the apprenticeships that are being offered through this program. Would you say you support a wide range of these, and how are you approaching this at the department?
Yeah, I absolutely thank you first and foremost for having me in your district. I support a wide range of apprenticeships in different industries. I think the model of the building trades is the gold standard. $2 billion a year investment, all by companies. There's no federal investment or state investment. There's some small grants around for different programs, but the majority of those programs get funded. And you're talking about high quality training going on there. That's one model we could use. I think that there's an opportunity for us in this country to really have the ability to partner with community colleges, workforce development programs. I had the Urban League in my office yesterday. We talked a little bit about diversity and inclusion. I've answered this question a couple times today about apprenticeships, but I hope by this next year's hearing, when I'm here, we're able to point to several dozen apprenticeship programs that we're kicking off in the country, whether it's in healthcare, IT, early childhood care, different industries that we can actually make a difference in.
Great. Great. Well, I look forward to that announcement. And certainly, as we see workforce shortages in just about everything, this is, I think, going to be extremely important because not just the skill sets developed, but the time that it takes in certain instances, I think we can maybe shortcut some of the time to get a trained individual on the job. I'm very proud that I supported the nomination of Christopher Williamson to be the Assistant Secretary for the Mine Safety and Health Administration, or MSHA as we call it at home. He's a proud son of Williamson, West Virginia, and we're happy that he is there. I don't know what initiatives he or you plan to take in the mine safety. Obviously, it's extremely important. I will tell you that our mines are operating at much higher capacity than they have in the past year or so because of the increased demand, because of the geopolitical situation we see around the world. We're happy about that. We're not happy about the geopolitical situation. We're happy we got more miners to work. So in the MSHA area, what are you guys looking at, and how can we be helpful?
Well, one thing we're looking at is we've seen an increase in fatalities this year in mining. And a couple of months ago, we had the major miners on a call. We did a call with them to talk about sharing best practices on safety. Something I did when I was the mayor of Boston, whenever we had high shootings in Boston, we brought all the stakeholders to the table. We did the same thing with the mining industry. We are asking for an increase in mine safety work in this budget. Chris is doing a great job. His feet are wet. There wasn't much of a learning curve there. He knew the issue. And certainly they're working hard, and we do need to, we get some money from the American Rescue Plan, and we need some additional funding on the mine safety. We're actually seeing an increase in mining, maybe not coal mining, but we're seeing an increase in mining in America as well, metal mines and things like that. So we need to make sure we stay on top of it. And
Right.
Anytime we acknowledge that there's a tragedies happening, we're on top of it.
Well, good. And I know a lot of those can occur in a lot of different, they may not be at the face of the mine in the instance of the coal mining. A lot of them are vehicular accidents and things like that on the work site. So anything we can do to make them safer and keep them healthy is important. Last thing, I'm just going to kind of put this on your radar screen. I've always been interested in youth build. I've visited the Randolph County Housing Authority has a youth build program that they've had for years. And then for some reason last year, no funding. And so it was kind of disruptive. If you could help me kind of figure out, they did get their funding for this year, so we're very pleased about that. But we want to have the continuity that you need in a program like that. So if we could work with your office to try to figure out how to make sure they have a ironclad application that they can continue this program.
No, absolutely. I've been a supporter of Youth Build for 25 years. When I was a legislator in Massachusetts, we used to support it. And I know that Youth Build got $24 million grant this year on Youth Build, but also clean energy. So some of the transition as well.
Good. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, I really hugely appreciate the President's strong investment in DOL's proposed budget for the wage and hour division. As you know, the federal minimum wage has been frozen since 2009 at the rate of $7.25 per hour. Yet, even at that low rate, some employers are denying their workers that unacceptably low wage, or their overtime, or both. And it really is our job to protect those workers and make sure they are properly paid for their work. But right now, I know the agency does not have the resources to do their job when corporations flout the law. Can you talk a little bit about how the requested increase in wage and hour will allow you to improve the oversight on that?
Yeah, there's no question about it. When I came in here a year ago, March, as the Secretary of Labor, one of the first things I did was looking at the different departments and agencies to see how we're doing with carrying out the work. At that time, you and Congress and Senate had just passed the American Rescue Plan, and the money hadn't quite been diverted yet to the different agencies. And we found that there was a real shortfall in enforcement and the ability for these different departments, wage and hour and OSHA and other places, to do their job. I don't view wage and hour, OSHA, and MSHA, I'll use those three as example, as just an agency to go out and give corporations in America a hard time. I would love to get to the point where we can do education as well with companies and what it means to pay people forward, but we're not there yet. So what this additional revenue would do would allow us the opportunity to protect more American workers and making sure that workers that are owed money, who did the job, worked for companies, and who are undercut by somebody, that they pay their workers fairly. That's all we're asking for here. So that's kind of what would allow us the opportunity to do more enforcement of workers' rights and making sure, and we're talking about workers who worked the work.
Yeah.
We're not talking about people who didn't do the job. We're talking about people who actually worked the work, did the 30 hours, the 40 hours, the 8 hours, whatever it was, and didn't get paid because their employer decided, I'm not going to pay you.
Right. Okay, thank you. And finally, I just want to talk to you because I'm about our young people who are disconnected from educational and workforce opportunities right now. I know that more than 1 million fewer students are enrolled in college now compared to before the pandemic, and the decline of community college is also really significant. And high school graduation rates decreased in nearly half of all the states this past year, reversing really decades of progress. So work-based learning experiences are really integral to keeping young people connected to their school, and high-quality workforce development programs can help successfully re-engage those young people who have or are considering leaving school before graduation and put them on pathways to success. Talk to us about how you are working to strengthen the links between education and workforce development systems to re-engage these young people.
I'm going to just, for an observation, your relationship with Senator Blunt, we need more of that when we talk about how we're going to move our economy forward, how we're going to move our workforce forward. We need to be collectively working as Democrats and Republicans to really make sure we're making investments in job training, workforce development, apprenticeships. We can look at one side of the aisle, as you just said, people not going to college and dropping out of high school and not having opportunity as a challenge and a difficult and sad challenge for America. But you can also look at the other side of the coin, it's an opportunity. How do we get to those young people? How do we connect them to the workforce development, apprenticeships, job training opportunities that are out there? As I go around this country, I've visited 36 states. I've visited probably 82 cities. I go to community colleges everywhere. And I'm in different neighborhoods. I'm talking to businesses and leaders and what's out there, whether it's Electric Boat in Connecticut or it's Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. These are public, and then private industry. There's so many opportunities out there for people in America. We need to really make sure that we're connecting young people to jobs. And we need to make sure that not just connecting them to jobs, we need to go out and find the young people. We see it in Job Corps. Our Job Corps centers pre-pandemic had 57,000 young people in it. 57,000 people. Today we have, I think there's 20,000 online, 12,000 in person. We're getting there, but we're not there. We've lost a lot. So we have to be more intentional going out and recruiting and finding young people and finding people to let them know what's available. A lot of people, Senator Schultz talked about online presence. A lot of people, including myself, didn't know that we had American job centers in America. I had 2 in the city of Boston. I had no idea they were there. We have to do a better job of explaining what those programs are.
Okay, thank you. Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple more questions, Secretary. One is looking at the proposed budget and back to the topic of inflation. Sometimes the budget reflects big increases in programs. On all of the veterans programs at the Department of Labor, the increase was less than 2%. There were a couple of programs where actually programs were reduced, like state grants and transition assistance. What are you going to do about these veterans programs that have a less than 2% increase in a more than 8% inflation world?
Yeah, no, one thing that we're not cutting the veterans budget. We are increasing the veterans budget. The veterans, we work very closely.
Well, I'm not suggesting you're not increasing.
No, I'm not saying you did that. I'm not saying you are. Sorry.
This is a question of how much you're increasing it, and if these programs lose traction, particularly the couple of programs you're cutting, but I'm overall interested in all of these programs that don't increase, that increase by less than 2%. Other programs in the department increase by a lot. I mean, you're asking for a 13% increase in the overall budget, but the existing veterans programs all grow by less than 2%. That's my question.
Yeah, well, we're asking, yeah, thank you. So I'm just trying to get my notes here. We're asking for a 5.6% increase in our veterans budget, the bottom line. And part of that is because the Veterans Department is, when I talk about apprenticeship programs, we're including the veterans in the apprenticeship program. When I talk about workforce development and job training investments, we're including the veterans in that program as well. So it's not a, God bless you, it's not a directed line item in the workforce development for veterans, but we have veterans included in those conversations and in that money. So when we think about like the trucking challenge, we reached out, we did a trucking challenge. The Department of Labor made an investment because you gave us money, a little bit of discretionary funds to create this program. We did. The first place we reach out to is the veterans to get veterans into the program. So we're integrating our veterans office into everything that we're doing. So the veterans money is specifically for vets, for them to do the outreach and do all the work that they do. And then all the other money that we have, whether it's workforce development, job training, all this, the veterans are in part of that as well.
Well, I don't want to say to that, Secretary, there's a reason that we had the veterans set aside in some of these areas. And I think when we did that, the idea that, well, the veterans are included in everything else would not have been a very satisfactory answer as you're trying to focus on veterans specifically. But we can talk about that some more. My other question is, the department in the American Rescue Plan received $2.2 billion in March as part of that. Less than 5% of that's been spent. $94 million has been spent. $335 million has been obligated. So less than 5% has been spent, less than 20% or so has been obligated. What are you planning to do with that $2.2 billion?
I was just trying to, we're still spending it. I was told behind me we're still spending it. I'll have to get back.
That's a better answer than we're not going to spend it. But,
yeah, well, if you give me money, I'm going to spend it. Let me get back to specifically on what it is, where we're going, and the reasons for it. We're having challenges with hiring. We're having challenges with different pieces. Let me look into that and get back to it better.
Well, I would think some of the overall, this big increase you asked for in the overall budget, maybe there's some ways to justify this $2.2 billion to fill some of those gaps. But I'd look forward to talking to you about your plans on that money specifically.
No, absolutely. And we don't just want to spend the money just for the sake of spending the money.
Well, I agree with that.
You know, this is taxpayers' dollars. We want to make sure you spend it correctly.
Yeah. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. That will end our hearing today. Secretary Walsh, thank you for a very thoughtful discussion about how we can support our working families and build an economy that does work for everyone. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions for the record will be due June 24th at 5 p.m. The hearing record will remain open until then for members who wish to submit additional materials for the record. Committee is adjourned.